The little girl was locked in a barn until the cowboy broke the door with his bare hands. The scream came just after midnight. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo across the canyon or wake the town, but it cut through the stillness like a knife through skin, sharp, small, and impossible to ignore. Caleb's horse stopped before he did. The animal's ears flicked forward, head turning toward the east, where the desert stretched black and endless under a sky full of stars. Caleb sat frozen in the saddle, one hand gripping the reins, the other resting on his thigh. His breath came slow. His heartbeat did not. He knew that sound. He had heard it before, 15 years ago, in a different place, from a different girl. And he had ridden away. The scream came again. This time it was weaker, like something breaking under too much weight. It came from somewhere beyond the ridge, past the cluster of buildings that called themselves a town. Caleb's jaw tightened. His fingers curled into fists. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to let the night swallow the sound and carry on like he always did. He was good at that. He had made a life out of it. But the horse wouldn't move, and neither would he. Caleb turned the reins and rode toward the scream. The town was called Dust Haven, though there was nothing holy about it. A handful of crooked buildings leaned against each other like drunks at closing time. A saloon with broken shutters. A general store with a sign hanging by one nail. A church with no bell. And at the far edge, where the dirt gave way to dry grass and thorn bushes, stood a barn. It was old. Older than the town, maybe. The wood was gray and splintered, held together by rust and stubbornness. The roof sagged in the middle like a spine bent too long under burden. There were no animals inside. No eye. No life. Just a door. And behind that door a child. Caleb dismounted slowly, boots hitting the ground without sound. He stood there for a moment, staring at the barn like it might disappear if he blinked. The wind moved around him, carrying dust and the faint smell of rot. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out. The town slept. The stars watched. And inside the barn, the little girl screamed again. This time, Caleb moved. He crossed the dirt in long strides, his shadow stretching behind him like a ghost. When he reached the barn, he pressed his hand against the door. The wood was rough under his palm, warm from the day's heat. He could hear her now, not screaming anymore, but crying. Soft, broken sobs that sounded like they'd been going on too long. "Hey," he said, voice low. "You in there?" The crying stopped. Silence. Caleb's chest tightened. He knocked again, gentler this time. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." Still nothing. Then a voice. Small. Shaking. "They locked me in." Caleb closed his eyes. His hand stayed flat against the door, fingers spread wide like he was holding something together. "Who locked you in?" "My mama's man." The words were simple, honest, and they hit Caleb harder than any fist ever had. He stepped back and looked at the door. There was a chain wrapped around the handle, padlocked tight. No key in sight. No way to open it without breaking something. Caleb's mind turned over the options. Find a rock, smash the lock, wake the whole town. Or walk away. Pretend he never heard her. Pretend she didn't remind him of someone he'd failed a long time ago. But he didn't walk away. He grabbed the chain with both hands and pulled. The metal bit into his palms. His shoulders burned. His boots dug into the dirt as he threw his weight backward, teeth clenched, breath hissing through his nose. The chain didn't give. The lock held. But Caleb didn't let go. He pulled again. And again. His hands were bleeding now, slick and hot. His vision blurred at the edges. But he kept pulling, kept fighting, kept refusing to be the man who walked away twice. The chain groaned. The wood around the handle cracked. And then snap. The lock broke. Caleb stumbled backward, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot up his spine, but he didn't care. He scrambled to his feet, ripped the chain away, and yanked the door open. The inside of the barn was dark. It smelled like old straw and fear. And in the corner, curled up against the wall, with her knees pulled to her chest, was the little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her dress was torn. Her hair hung in tangles around her face. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and filled with something Caleb recognized too well, the look of someone who had stopped believing anyone would come. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb knelt down, slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt if he moved too fast. "I'm sorry I took so long," he said quietly. The girl stared at him. Her lip trembled. Her small hands gripped the fabric of her dress, so tight her knuckles went white. "Are you going to lock me back in?" she whispered. Caleb's throat closed. He shook his head. "No." "Are you going to hurt me?" "No." "Are you going to leave?" That question hung in the air like smoke. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw his sister's face. Saw the night he rode away. Saw the choice he made and the shame he carried ever since. "No," he said again. And this time he meant it. The girl didn't move. She just watched him, waiting for proof. Waiting to see if words meant anything in a world that had taught her they didn't. Caleb held out his hand. His palm was torn and bleeding, dirt mixed with red. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. "My name's Caleb," he said softly. "What's yours?" The girl looked at his hand, then at his face. Then, slowly, so slowly it almost hurt to watch, she reached out and took it. "Lily," she whispered. And just like that, something inside Caleb, that had been broken for 15 years, started to mend. He didn't ask her why she was locked in. Not yet. He didn't ask where her mother was, or who the man was, or how long she'd been there. Those questions could wait. Right now, all that mattered was getting her out. Caleb lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Her head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel her heart beating fast, like a bird trapped in a cage. He carried her out of the barn and into the open air, where the stars were still bright, and the wind was still blowing, and the world was still turning, even when it felt like it shouldn't. Lily didn't say anything. She just held on. And Caleb didn't let go. The old man's hands shook as he spoke. "She sold her," he said. Plain as that. Caleb stood in the dirt outside the saloon, Lily asleep against his chest, wrapped in his coat. The sky was turning from black to gray, that quiet hour when the world holds its breath before waking. The old man sat on the saloon steps, a bottle hanging loose between his knees. His face was lined deep as canyon walls. His eyes were red, not from crying, from years of looking away. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Say that again." The old man coughed, spat into the dust. "The girl's mama. She sold her 3 days ago. To that man she's been running with, Frank Durner. Mean son of a bitch. Got a smile that don't reach his eyes." He looked up at Caleb, and for a moment something like shame crossed his face. He told her he'd take care of the girl. Said he'd teach her to work, teach her to be useful. But we all knew what he meant. Caleb felt the weight of Lily's small body against him. Her breath was soft and even. She was finally sleeping, finally safe. But the words the old man spoke settled over him like ash from a fire that wouldn't stop burning. "And her mother just let him?" The old man nodded. "For a bottle of whiskey, and a promise he'd stay." Caleb closed his eyes. His hand tightened on Lily's back, holding her closer. "Where is she now?" The mother. "Gone. Left town yesterday morning with Durner. Rode out west toward the mining camps. Didn't even look back." The rage came slow at first. A heat in Caleb's chest that spread through his ribs, down his arms, into his fists. He wanted to put his hand through something. Wanted to ride after them, drag them back, make them face what they'd done. But beneath the rage was something quieter, something colder. Grief. Because 15 years ago, Caleb had made a choice too. He was 17 the night he left. His father was a rancher, if you could call a man with 3 horses and a falling down house a rancher. He was also a drunk. And when he drank, he got mean. Caleb had learned to take the hits, learned to keep his head down, learned to survive. But his sister, Emma, hadn't. She was 12, small for her age, quiet. She had their mother's eyes, soft and brown, full of hope even when there was no reason for it. And their father hated her for it. The night Caleb left, their father had beaten Emma so badly she couldn't stand. Caleb had watched it happen from the doorway, frozen, his heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to stop it, wanted to step between them, take the blows himself. But he didn't. He was afraid. And when their father finally passed out on the floor, bottle still in his hand, Caleb made his choice. He packed his things. He took what little money was hidden under the floorboards. And he rode away. Emma had called after him. He heard her voice, small and broken, begging him to stay, begging him not to leave her alone. But he didn't stop. He told himself he'd come back, told himself he'd get work, save money, come back and take her away. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And the guilt turned into something easier to carry, distance. He never went back. And 2 years later, he heard she was dead. Caleb opened his eyes. The old man was still sitting on the steps, watching him with a look that said he knew the weight Caleb was carrying, knew the shape of regret. "You gonna go after Em?" the old man asked. Caleb looked down at Lily. Her face was peaceful now, the fear finally gone from her features. She looked like a child again, not a thing to be sold, not a burden to be locked away, just a little girl who deserved better than the world had given her. "No," Caleb said quietly. "I'm not." The old man frowned. "Why not?" "Because she needs me here." The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign. For 15 years, Caleb had been a drifter. A cowboy with no ties, no home, no reason to stay anywhere longer than a season. He moved through towns like wind through grass, there one moment gone the next. It was easier that way, safer. But looking at Lily, now, feeling the weight of her trust, he realized something. Running didn't fix anything. It just made the guilt heavier. The old man stood slowly, his knees cracking. He looked at Caleb for a long moment, then nodded. "You're a better man than most." Caleb shook his head. "No, I'm not." "Then maybe you're trying to be." The old man shuffled past him, disappearing into the saloon's dark interior. Caleb stood alone in the gray light, holding Lily close, the town slowly waking around him. A rooster crowed. A door slammed. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And Caleb thought about Emma. He thought about the sound of her voice calling after him, the way her hand had reached for him in the darkness, the way he had turned his back and ridden away. He couldn't bring her back, couldn't undo the choice he'd made. But he could make a different choice now. He could stay. Lily stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at him, confused for a moment, like she'd forgotten where she was. Then she remembered, and the fear crept back into her face. "It's okay," Caleb said softly. "You're safe." She didn't say anything, just stared at him with those wide, watchful eyes. Eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that didn't believe in safe anymore. "Where's my mama?" she whispered. Caleb's chest tightened. He could lie, could tell her she'd come back, could give her hope, even if it was false. But he didn't. "She's gone," he said. Lily's lip trembled. "Did I do something wrong?" The question broke something in Caleb. He knelt down, setting her gently on the ground, keeping his hands on her shoulders. "No," he said, his voice rough. "You didn't do anything wrong. You hear me? Nothing." "Then why did she leave?" Caleb didn't have an answer for that. Not one that would make sense to a 7-year-old girl. Not one that would make sense to anyone. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving." Lily looked at him. Really looked at him. Searching his face for the lie. For the crack that would show her he was just like everyone else. But Caleb didn't look away. "Promise," she whispered. Caleb thought about all the promises he'd broken. All the times he'd walked away. All the people he'd failed. But this time, he nodded. "I promise." They left the saloon as the sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Caleb's horse stood where he'd left it, patient and steady. He lifted Lily onto the saddle, then climbed up behind her. She leaned back against his chest, small and fragile and impossibly brave. "Where are we going?" she asked. Caleb looked out at the open land stretching before them. He didn't have a plan. didn't have a destination. But for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't running. Somewhere better, he said. And as they rode away from Dust Haven, leaving the barn and the silence and the shame behind, Caleb made himself a promise too. He would not fail her the way he'd failed Emma. Not this time. The chain rattled in the silence. Caleb stood before the barn door, hands wrapped around cold metal, knuckles white. He didn't knock, didn't call out, didn't waste time with words that wouldn't matter. He just gripped the chain and pulled. The metal bit into his skin. Pain shot through his palms, sharp and immediate. But he didn't let go. He planted his boots in the dirt, leaned back, and pulled harder. The chain held. Caleb's jaw clenched. His shoulders burned. Sweat broke out across his forehead despite the cold desert night. Behind him, his horse stood silent, watching. Above him, the stars watched too. And inside the barn, the little girl he'd promised not to leave was waiting. He pulled again. The wood around the door handle groaned. A crack appeared, thin as a thread. Caleb saw it, and something ignited in his chest. Not hope, not yet, but something close. Something that tasted like refusal. He would not let this door stay closed. Would not let this child stay locked away. Would not walk away again. His hands were bleeding now. He could feel it, warm and slick, between his fingers. The chain was cutting through skin, down to muscle, maybe bone. But he didn't care. Pain was nothing. Pain was just proof he was still trying. He pulled with everything he had left. And the chain snapped. The sound echoed across the empty land like a gunshot. Caleb stumbled backward, hitting the ground hard. His head spun. His lungs gasped for air. For a moment he just lay there in the dirt, staring up at the sky, his hands on fire with pain. But only for a moment. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the way his body protested. He grabbed the broken chain, ripped it away from the door, and yanked the handle. The wood resisted, swollen and stubborn. Caleb put his shoulder into it and shoved. The door gave way. It swung open with a groan that sounded almost human. And the darkness inside the barn spilled out like water from a broken dam. Caleb stepped through. The smell hit him first. Old straw, dust, fear. The kind of smell that settles into walls and won't leave. His eyes adjusted slowly to the dim light filtering through gaps in the rotting roof. Shadows filled the corners. Cobwebs hung like torn lace. And in the far corner, pressed against the wall as if trying to disappear into it, was Lily. She was smaller than he remembered. Tinier, like something the world had tried to erase. Her dress was dirty and torn. Her hair hung in tangled knots around her face. Her arms were wrapped around her knees, holding herself together. And in her hands, clutched so tight her knuckles were pale, was a doll. It wasn't much of a doll. Just scraps of fabric tied together with string. 2 buttons for eyes. No mouth. No smile. Just a blank face staring out at a world that had already shown it too much. Lily didn't move. She just stared at Caleb with eyes that were too old for her face. Eyes that had learned not to hope. Caleb's chest tightened. He'd seen that look before. On his sister Emma's face, the night he left. On his own face every time he looked in a mirror and saw what he'd become, a drifter, a coward, a man who ran instead of fought. But not tonight. Tonight he stayed. "Hey," Caleb said softly. His voice sounded too loud in the barn stillness. He took a step forward, slow and careful, like approaching a wild animal. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." Lily didn't respond. She just pressed herself harder against the wall, her eyes tracking his every movement. Caleb stopped. He looked down at his hands, bloody, torn, useless. Then he looked back at her, at the way she held that doll, at the way her whole body trembled even though she was trying so hard to be still. And he understood. She didn't believe him. Why would she? Every adult in her life had failed her. Her mother had sold her. Frank Durner had locked her away. The town had heard her screams and done nothing. And now here was another stranger, another man, another person asking her to trust when trust had only ever led to pain. Caleb knelt down. Slowly, his knees hit the dirt floor, and he stayed there, making himself small, making himself less threatening. He held up his bleeding hands, palms out, showing her he had no weapon, no chain, nothing but skin and bone and the weight of too many failures. "My name's Caleb," he said quietly. "I heard you screaming, and I came." Lily's lip trembled. Her grip on the doll tightened. "Everyone hears me," she whispered. "Nobody comes." The words hit Caleb like a fist to the gut. He closed his eyes, feeling the truth of it settle over him. She was right. The whole town had heard her, and they'd all chosen silence, just like he'd chosen silence 15 years ago. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know they didn't come. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked at her. "But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving." "You'll leave?" Lily said. Her voice was flat, empty. "Everyone leaves." "Not me." "Why not?" It was a simple question. But Caleb didn't have a simple answer. He thought about Emma, about the way she'd called after him, about the 16 years he'd spent running from that night, thinking distance would make the guilt lighter. It hadn't. It had just made him lonelier. "Because someone should have come for me once," he said finally. "And they didn't. And I don't want you to grow up feeling like I do." Lily stared at him. Her eyes were wet now, but she didn't cry. She just watched him with that careful, guarded look children get when they've had to raise themselves. "How do you feel?" she asked. Caleb's throat tightened. Empty. The word hung between them like smoke. True and terrible and impossible to take back. Lily looked down at her doll. She ran her small fingers over its blank face, tracing the button eyes. "Me too," she whispered. And in that moment, something shifted. Not healed, not fixed, but shifted. Like a door that had been locked for too long finally creaking open, just enough to let a sliver of light through. Caleb stayed kneeling. He didn't move closer. Didn't push. Just stayed there in the dirt, hands open, waiting, letting her decide, letting her have the choice no one else had given her. For a long time, Lily didn't move. She just sat there, holding her doll, watching him, testing him, waiting to see if he'd get impatient, if he'd grab her, if he'd prove her right. But Caleb didn't move. He'd spent 15 years running. He could spend 15 minutes waiting. Finally, so slowly Caleb almost didn't notice it happening, Lily's grip on the doll loosened. Her shoulders dropped, and she took a breath. A real breath. The kind you take when you've been holding tension so long you forgot what it felt like to let go. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. What if they come back?" "They won't." "How do you know?" Caleb thought about Frank Durner, about men like him, bullies who preyed on the small and weak because it made them feel strong. Men who locked children in barns and called it discipline. Men who smiled with cruelty in their eyes and called it love. "Because if they do," Caleb said quietly, "they'll have to go through me first." Lily looked at him, and for the first time since he'd broken through that door, something changed in her eyes. Not trust. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Maybe the faintest possibility that this stranger with bloody hands and a tired face might actually mean what he said. She stood up, slow and shaky, like a foal learning to walk. The doll stayed clutched in her hand. She took one step toward him, then another, and then she stopped, right in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough to run, close enough to choose. Caleb didn't reach for her. He just stayed kneeling, looking up at her, letting her see him. All of him. The scars. The regret. The desperate hope that maybe this time he could be the man someone needed him to be. "You promise you won't leave?" Lily whispered. Caleb thought about all the promises he'd broken, all the people he'd failed, all the reasons he had no right to make this promise now. But he made it anyway. "I promise." Lily looked at him for one more long moment. Then, so quiet he almost missed it, she nodded. And she took his hand. Caleb stood slowly, carefully, like he was holding something made of glass. Lily's hand was small and cold in his. She didn't let go. And he didn't either. He led her out of the barn, out of the darkness, out of the place where she'd been forgotten. The night air hit them both, cool and clean. The stars were still there, bright and endless. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the moon. Lily looked up at the sky, then at Caleb, then at the town sleeping behind them, the town that had hurt her and done nothing. "Where are we going?" she asked. Caleb looked down at her, at this small, brave girl who'd been locked away and left behind, but somehow still found the courage to take his hand. And he realized he didn't have an answer, didn't have a plan, didn't have anything except a horse, a guilty conscience, and a promise he intended to keep. But maybe that was enough. "Away from here," he said. And they walked into the night together, leaving the broken barn door swinging open behind them like a mouth finally able to speak. The first light touched the horizon as they left Dust Haven behind. Caleb sat tall in the saddle, reins loose in one hand. Lily sat in front of him, wrapped in his coat, too big for her small frame, the sleeves hanging past her hands. Her arms were around his waist, holding on, but not tight, not desperately, just enough to feel steady. The town was still asleep. No one watched them go. No one called out. No one asked where the cowboy was taking the girl who'd been locked in the barn. The streets were empty. The saloon was dark, and the barn door hung open like a mouth that had finally stopped screaming. Caleb didn't look back. Neither did Lily. They rode east toward the rising sun, where the desert stretched out wide and endless. The air was cool. The sky was painted in shades of purple and pink, and the only sound was the steady rhythm of hoofbeats against hard ground. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Caleb wasn't good with words. Never had been. He'd spent most of his life alone, and silence had become easier than conversation. But he didn't mind it. Silence felt safe. It didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers, didn't remind him of all the things he'd rather forget. But Lily wasn't like him. After about an hour of riding, she shifted in the saddle and looked up at the sky. "Do you know the stars?" she asked. Her voice was small but steady, stronger than it had been in the barn, like the open air had given her room to breathe again. Caleb glanced down at her. "Some. My grandma knew all of them," Lily said. "She used to take me outside at night and tell me their names. She said they were like friends, that even if you were alone, the stars were always watching." Caleb's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to tell a child that stars were just burning gas millions of miles away, that they didn't care, didn't watch, didn't save anyone. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he just asked, "What happened to your grandma?" Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said she died 2 years ago. After that, it was just me and Mama. She paused. But Mama wasn't the same after. She got sad. And then she got mean. And then she met Frank. The name hung in the air like smoke. Caleb's jaw tightened. He thought about Frank Durner, about men like him, outlaws in spirit if not in law, men who took what they wanted and called it survival, men who hurt the weak because it made them feel strong. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly. Lily shrugged. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of someone who'd learned too young that sorry didn't fix things. "It's okay. Grandma used to say that some people forget how to be good. She said it's not because they're bad. It's because they're scared." Caleb looked down at her. "You think your mama was scared? I think she didn't know how to be alone." The words were simple, honest, and they cut deeper than Caleb expected, because he understood that. He'd spent 15 years running from being alone. And in the process, he'd become the loneliest man he knew. They rode through the morning, following a trail that wound through red rock and scrub brush. The sun climbed higher, turning the sky from pink to blue. Heat began to rise from the ground in shimmering waves. Caleb's horse moved steady and sure, its hooves finding purchase on the uneven terrain. Lily didn't stop talking. She told him about the songs her grandmother used to sing, old songs with words she didn't understand, but melodies she'd never forget. She told him about the doll she carried, how she'd made it herself from scraps of her grandmother's old dress. She told him about the nights in the barn when it was so dark she couldn't see her own hands, and how she'd sing those songs to herself just to remember she was still there. Caleb listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice, just listened. And with every word Lily spoke, something inside him began to shift. Something he thought was dead. Something that felt almost like hope. He realized she wasn't just talking to fill the silence. She was talking to prove to herself that she was free, that she could speak without fear of being silenced, that her voice mattered. And maybe, in a way, she was talking to him too, showing him what it looked like to be brave, to keep going even when the world had tried to break you. By midday, they reached the edge of a canyon. It was vast, a wound carved into the earth by time and water, stretching out as far as the eye could see. The walls were striped in layers of red and orange and gold, each one a marker of years long gone. At the bottom, a river ran silver in the sunlight. Caleb pulled the horse to a stop at the canyon's rim. The wind was stronger here, carrying the smell of dust and stone and something wild. He dismounted slowly, then helped Lily down. She stood beside him, her doll still clutched in one hand, her other hand holding the edge of his coat to keep it from blowing away. For a moment, they just stood there, looking out at the canyon. The world felt big, endless. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb didn't feel small because of it. "It's beautiful," Lily whispered. Caleb nodded. It was, in a raw, unforgiving kind of way. The canyon didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. It was broken and scarred and shaped by forces beyond its control. But it was still standing, still there, still whole in its own way, kind of like them. "You ever been this far from home before?" Caleb asked. Lily shook her head. "No, but I don't think I had a home anyway. Not really." Caleb looked down at her, at this small girl who'd been locked away and forgotten, but still found reasons to talk about stars and songs and beauty, who'd been sold by her own mother, but still had the courage to take a stranger's hand and trust him to lead her somewhere better. She deserved better than what the world had given her. Better than a barn. Better than silence. Better than him, probably. But she was here. And so was he. And maybe that was enough to start. "Lily," Caleb said quietly. She looked up at him. The wind pulled at her hair, tangling it across her face. Her eyes were clear, hopeful, waiting. "I need to tell you something," he continued. His voice was rough, unsteady. "I'm not a good man. I've done things I'm not proud of. And I've run from a lot of things I should have stayed and fought for." Lily frowned. "Like what?" Caleb hesitated. Then he said, "I had a sister once. Her name was Emma. And when she needed me most, I left her. I told myself I'd come back, but I didn't. And she died alone because of it." The words felt like stones in his mouth. Heavy, sharp. But he forced them out anyway. Because Lily deserved the truth. Deserved to know who she was trusting. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you miss her?" "Every day." "Then you're not a bad man." Caleb's throat tightened. "How do you figure that?" "Because bad men don't miss people," Lily said simply. "They just forget." It was such a small statement. So matter of fact. But it hit Caleb harder than any accusation ever could. Because maybe she was right. Maybe carrying the weight of what you'd done wrong wasn't the same as being beyond redemption. Maybe it just meant you were still human. He knelt down so he was eye level with her. The wind whipped around them, carrying dust and the sound of the river far below. The sun was directly overhead now, casting sharp shadows across the canyon floor. "I can't bring Emma back," Caleb said, "but I can make you a promise. And I need you to hear me when I say this, because I mean it with everything I have." Lily nodded, her eyes locked on his. "I will never leave you behind," Caleb said. "I don't care what happens. I don't care how hard it gets. I don't care if the whole world comes after us. I will not walk away from you, ever." Lily searched his face, looking for the lie, looking for the crack, looking for proof that promises were just words people said before they disappeared. But she didn't find it. Instead, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm and impossibly trusting. "Okay," she said. That was all. Just one word. but it carried the weight of 100 unsaid things. Belief, hope, the fragile beginning of trust. Caleb squeezed her hand gently, and for the first time in 15 years, he felt something other than guilt. He felt purpose. They stood at the canyon's edge a little longer, watching the way the light changed as the sun moved across the sky. Lily pointed out shapes in the rock formations, a horse, a bird, a face. Caleb listened and nodded and let himself imagine a future where this wasn't temporary, where he didn't ride away when things got hard, where he stayed. Eventually, Lily tugged on his hand. "Can we go now? Where do you want to go?" She thought about it. Then she smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. "Somewhere with trees." Caleb felt something warm spread through his chest. "All right, we'll find you some trees." He lifted her back onto the horse, then climbed up behind her. As they turned away from the canyon and started riding again, Lily leaned back against him and sighed, a sound of contentment so pure it almost broke him. "Caleb," she said after a while. "Yeah. Thank you for coming." He didn't answer right away. Couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere between his heart and his throat. Finally, he just said, "Thank you for letting me stay." And as they rode toward whatever came next, the desert opened before them like a promise, uncertain, unforgiving, but somehow full of possibility.